Anyway, I'm Joni Paddock, and I'm your designated hitter this morning for Bryna, who's not feeling quite well with her neck issue today. And hopefully she's going to get some help tomorrow that will get her back here and feeling much better. But I'm very pleased to have Dr. Vanessa Thimament with us this morning. And before I tell you about her, I do want to remind you, though, to please silence your cell phones. And please make sure that your masks are up over your nose and mouth for the protection of everybody here this morning. So please keep it up and don't let it slide down. So I'll tell you about Dr. Vanessa Thimament. Oh no, that's all right. Randy will bring it up for you. It's okay. He's got you covered. Okay, so she has quite an impressive background, so I'm going to tell you about it right now. Dr. Vanessa Thimament is a singer, songwriter, vocal arranger, and has been a professional musician since her first professional performance right after high school with none other than Shirley Jones, Ron Hussman, and Randy Sparks, and the Back Porch Majority. An almost lifelong Unitarian Universalist, Vanessa received her Master's of Divinity from Star King School for the Ministry and has been in various leadership roles in Unitarian Universalism since 1981. After a 25-year career as a Foley artist in major films and television, Vanessa wrote the book, The Foley Grail, which led her to pursue a Ph.D. in communications and moving image studios. And after decades of singing in choirs, musical theater, and jazz clubs, Vanessa increased her directing of both choral and small vocal groups. Vanessa's passions are spiritual growth, music, theater, film education, and baseball, and in her words, go Dodgers. Born in Glendale, Vanessa is over the moon to be back in California and to be living in this peaceful and spiritually deep place, the desert, and those are her words. Presently, Vanessa sings in several choirs, performs at various clubs in Southern California, and is writing a musical with her son, who lives in New York City. And you also may know that she is the choir director for the UUCOD choir and has done a splendid job. And I've talked to many of the choir members, and they have a lot of high praise for her. So we're happy to have you with us, Vanessa, and welcome to our pulpit for the first time. I'm sure it won't be the last. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the historic homelands of the various bands of Cahuilla people, and we honor the unique relationship that we hope emerges between our community and the indigenous people and their traditional territories. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Cahuilla people whose lands and water we benefit from today. We also want you to know that it doesn't matter where you or your ancestors are from, who you love, your gender identity, your theology, or your immigration status. We welcome all those who are committed to our core values as expressed in our 8 principles. Together we come to this place to share our hopes, our dreams, and our visions. We seek to build a diverse and inclusive community that honors our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Thank you for being with us this morning, whether you're here in the sanctuary or watching on Zoom, on the streaming. And if anyone would like to be on our email list, if you're not already, to learn more about us and our programming, you can contact us at admin, ADMIN, @uucod.org. And now, Vanessa will ring our Tibetan bowl to begin our service. And do we have music for centering this morning? Bill and Ingrid, yes? Okay. And we'll listen to our music for centering.
It is such a pleasure to be here and to be here in this capacity, which is different for you to see me in this role, but I want to express to you that it is a role I feel a great deal of gratitude to bring here. I want to let you know that the music you'll be hearing that was recorded is from one of our wonderful pianists, Malcolm Swan, who you're familiar with. Thank goodness we have such a plethora of music to offer and so many gifted people in our congregation, and I am so full of gratitude. So thank you all. The opening words today are from, I have to say, one of my most favorite books to read because I go back to it over and over to remind me of purpose, and that is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He describes his observation of what determined the difference between those who most likely would survive life in concentration camps in World War II, and this is not a downer, so don't get worried, and those who most likely would not. He formed his existentially based logotherapy from these observations. Here's what he said. What we really needed was a fundamental change in our attitude toward life. We had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach our despairing men, and this is his genderized language, so I'm keeping it intact, but we can extrapolate, that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and in right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. And with those words, we begin our worship with an opening hymn.
And now, as Vanessa lights the chalice, if you will join me in the chalice lighting words, which will be up on the screen. This fire is a reminder of the flame within us all, the yearning for freedom, the longing for truth, the flame of intuition, and the torch of conscience. And now for the biopark, Sandy Sladen will light our biopark candle. And read along with me, please. We light these candles in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as they journey towards spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all will prevail. Thank you, Sandy.
The opening words about Man's Search for Meaning, which was going to be the reading, I wanted to start as an opening because what I want to do is just comment a little bit on it as I set up the sermon. As we think about what our purpose is in life, I wanted to flip what the opening was because when things change and we have to adapt, one of the things that I was struck with as we had to scramble and change what we were doing today as we had no musician, and what I've been struck with as we've been living in a very difficult time with all of the adaptations we have had to make. One of the things that I want us to be thinking about as we proceed forward in our time together, and as we begin a new week, and as we begin into the fall, and we go into the changes of what will be happening in our country and in our world with everything that's happening, what I want us to be thinking about is what is our role in all of this and what can we bring to it? Because there's something very remarkable happening as we adapt. There is something that I'm going to be reading about and alluding to in the sermon that I'm going to be giving today that talks about the way people adapt and the way they change, what is normal, what is abnormal, and when do we know the difference. And as we proceed forward and we think about what I read to you and what Viktor Frankl teaches us about what our responsibility is and what we bring to life, there is something that he talks about throughout his book that I think is really critical. And what that is about is the purpose of life and the meaning of life. And what is logotherapy? And logotherapy is about finding a purpose and finding a reason to move forward. That it isn't just what is meaning, but what is our purpose and why are we here? And the reason that I flipped the order of what I did was because we had a completely different purpose today. Instead of running with what we were normally going to do with Kurt at the piano and everything running according to a very well-oiled plan and execution, everybody had to adapt to what the change was. Everybody did. Ian had to help. I had to change. Joni had to change. The team had to change. I had to have the words printed out for hymns because I had to lead it and think about the music and make sure that you were comfortable and be able to look at this. And all of a sudden, everything had to change and everybody's purpose had to change. And that got me thinking, and I thought, I want to share this. I want you all to know what this was like. We had to all change what our purpose was. We all had to adapt. We all had to normalize and change what was normal for us. We all had to show a different way, a different purpose, a different meaning. We all had to do that. We could not just proceed the way we thought things were going to be. We had to make it all work, and we had to be fine with it. And I am constantly reminded every day of my life now, since COVID hit, the pandemic, how it's changed everything we've had to do every single day, every accommodation, all of our assumptions, all of our comfortabilities, everything that we've had to think about, we've had to repurpose and rethink every action and every assumption we've made about every way life is. There's a saying in ministry, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Now it's a bromide. It's a trope. But there's some truth there. And I have had to use these past 2.5 years to really do deep examination because it has been brutal for me. And I'm assuming that it's been brutal on some level for everyone, no matter how comfortable they've been. I think everyone has had to really rethink, what does this mean? What is life? What is the meaning of it? What is the purpose of it? What is my purpose? And I will tell you, as I am up here in this pulpit for the first time in a very long time, something I did not think I would be doing again, and I am so grateful to be here. I have had to re-examine every piece of my life. And I'm one of these highly empathetic people, so please forgive me. I am grateful because I am learning a sense of humility I never thought possible. I am looking at how everybody had to change everything they were doing this morning so that I would be okay, so that we would be okay. And it's not like there are thousands of people here. It's not like we are megabucks. But what we are doing, even though it is small, it is large. It is meaningful. It is important. Because what we do every single day is rethink our purpose and rethink what matters. So flipping the order of setting this up, to me, mattered. And I just want you to know that. So for that reason, I am putting this button on the reading for you. Have you ever been flying somewhere and been so glad there was an empty seat next to you? That center seat, where you have a little extra space to put your phone or your pillow or your computer, blanket, whatever. Even share it with the person on the seat over on the other side because you knew you were lucky. You felt so grateful that this time you were not going to be crammed in the row for hours and you were going to rest comfortably. I really love it when that happens. It happened during the beginning of the pandemic when I had to fly a few times. I was a little concerned about flying for health reasons because I have asthma, and I'm hypervigilant about sanitizing. But I really enjoyed the extra space because they required that middle seat to be empty. Then people began flying again. And since I traveled to New York to see my son several times a year, it was a rarity. Now, I tend to sleep on planes because I get stressed traveling. I don't like a lot of noise, too much stimulation, or the increasing dysfunction of travel. Thus, my time on planes has most often been used to lightly nod off or meditate for as long as possible. But then Frank came along. It was a layover flight from Denver to New York for the Mother's Day trip to see my son, this past Mother's Day. We had 2 Broadway shows lined up and a few meals with friends. I was flying Southwest, which is rare for me, but this time I decided to try it as my typical Delta habit is harder to utilize now that I am back in California flying out of Palm Springs and not in Atlanta or Indianapolis. I got my Ph.D. in Atlanta and I had my endowed chair in Indianapolis. There were 25 empty center seats on the plane, and it was a late flight, so it was a safe bet, as we were minutes from taking off, that my nap was about to begin, and then there he was, this young man walking down the aisle and at the last minute coming toward me, and although he'd passed a lot of empty seats, I thought to myself, he's going to take the seat right next to me. I just know it. Is that seat taken? No, let me get up so you can get there more easily. My fate was sealed. The universe was messing with me yet again. He sat down, got settled in, a young Hispanic man, about 30, give or take, and he said, I almost missed my flight. They had not called my number, and I thought I had time, so I went to the restroom. I said to him, I did that in October when my son was getting married. I'd never done it before. Flying is so weird now, I acknowledged. Yeah, it really is, he agreed. I'm Frank. I'm Vanessa, mucho gusto. It's automatic. I have family from Mexico. Igualmente, he replied. I could sure use a beer. Now, I'm not a big drinker. And since Southwest was wooing me, they'd given me 2 drink vouchers. Well, here, take these. I'm not going to be using them. Thank you. He ordered 2 beers. Now, I don't recall exactly how we decided to start talking or why he was talking to me so much, but we seemed to be what we say simpático. So I said, are you from New York? Well, he wasn't. But he was going to New York to see one of his uncle's friends to do some business, and he worked in IT. That's pretty much all I got. But he added, I'm not supposed to travel out of the state. I'm out on bail. Well, that wasn't something I was going to let just lay there. So I said, oh, well, that's not something I expected you to say. So we talked for over 3 hours. Now, of course, I don't think you want a 3-hour replay of that plane conversation. No. So here's a distilled version of the salient points of the conversation as Frank began to tell me his story. Frank comes from East LA from a Latinx family with 1 brother and 2 sisters. His sisters both have master's degrees, and his father, brother, uncle, and Frank have all spent time in prison. Frank, at this point, told me he was out on bail for pulling a gun on his brother. Here's what he told me. His cousin and he got into an altercation when his cousin began calling him names over some dispute which is still unclear to me. Apparently, from what I could discern, one of the ways conflicts in his neighborhood arise is from name-calling to devalue, now that's my word, not his, as a way of gaining status over each other. To regain male dignity, the man cannot walk away from a dispute when there's name-calling, so they must knuckle up. I had to have Frank explain to me what that meant, since that's a term I was unfamiliar with. Now, I'm from an Hispanic family on my father's side. My grandfather was born in Mexico and from a Mexican mother and an American father. And the family moved up to California right before the revolution. But my family's from a different world, the world of mining engineers. Now, my grandfather started a Mexican food company called Superior Tamales in Lincoln Heights and used to regularly hire undocumented workers as part of our family tradition. So while I'm not unfamiliar with those who might feel disconnected from the more hegemonic white culture of Los Angeles in the 50s and 60s, I had no experience with the world Frank knows. So I wanted to take this opportunity to understand his experience as best I could. I felt it was a gift, a mitzvah, that the universe had brought this man into my life to teach me about his life, so I eagerly listened. Knuckle up is just fighting with fists. As we recall in the original West Side Story, fist to fist was the agreed way to fight between Nardo and Riff before the knife was tossed into the mix. This is what knuckle up is intended to be. So Frank and his cousin knuckled up. Now, I, like so many in my world, do not resolve conflict this way. So I was fascinated. I wanted Frank to explain why this is the way his family and friends resolve their disputes. This is what the very friendly and openly expressive man told me. Where I come from, we don't talk things out. If someone disrespects us, we fight it out. And we know others might not understand, but we all agree that this is how things are done. Frank explained that his cousin then enlisted Frank's brother to confront Frank in this dispute. This perpetuated more conflict. But Frank's father and his uncle, both who had been in trouble as youths, had warned Frank not to let this escalate, as Frank has 2 young daughters and needed to consider them. But Frank's father and uncle had served time and regretted, both Frank's uncle and brother had served time, and had regretted their actions and wanted him to learn from their mistakes. But as we all know, we don't learn from others' mistakes now, do we? I gleaned that Frank was feeling threatened by what his cousin and brother were up to, and when his brother came at him to confront him, Frank pulled a gun, and the cousin called the police. Now, who and who else and why ended up in jail or on bail other than Frank, I'm unclear. But what I know is this: Frank was out on bail for threatening his brother with a gun. His cousin had been one to call the police, and Frank had already served time in prison. There's a pattern. Clearly, Frank didn't have another way of handling conflict, and his cousin had disrespected him. Now, I'm reminded of the Godfather trilogy. We all know about all the lessons you can learn from the Godfather. There's the one about keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. The one about going to the mattresses, or leave the gun but take the cannoli. 2 of the lessons, don't take things so personally, Sonny, or violence is the last option. Those are the ones I remember. So to hear a story about violence as the only option was interesting to me. We might also remember that in Godfather 2, when Tom Hagen visits Frankie Pentangeli, who's supposed to testify against Michael Corleone, the 2 discuss in an obtuse way about how people will commit suicide to protect their families from future harm. This clearly foreshadows Pentangeli's own death, which is poetic yet unsettling. So we as the audience understand upon cultural comeuppance is about to be implied. So this brings me to an interesting issue. Groups, families, businesses, political entities can and do operate with their own set of rules. But what complicates things is when the larger society, of which those groups are all a part, follow an agreed upon set of norms, rules, conventions, and laws for the common good that supersede the smaller groups or the individual. There is an applied agreement of a social contract that requires the smaller groups to defer to that contract. What happens when these smaller groups operate in direct conflict with the social contract of the larger society? Now, Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, which I read earlier, documents his experiences at Auschwitz and refers to Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. Here's what he says. This is what Lessing says. There are things that cause you to lose your reason, or you have nothing to lose. Some occurrences, and this is what Frankl says, some occurrences in life are so unacceptable, so repugnant, that society will not tolerate them, or the social contract will be, this is my saying, so substantially weakened or be destroyed. Frankl then goes on to write, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation becomes normal. What Frankl observed was the daily accommodating the prisoners used to deal with the most unthinkable and abnormal circumstances they found themselves in during their tenure in Auschwitz in World War II. Their behaviors in their normal societies in Europe would have no place in a concentration camp. But their adaptive ways of behaving, which would be aberrant in normal life, made sense within the abnormal way of living in the camps. We adapt to our environments. And to judge others in their environments by our own environments and our own experiences never makes sense. Rather, it makes more sense to contextualize and empathize, but not normalize behaviors that might be suited for one situation, but not another. In this context, what Frank shared with me makes sense to him. In this context, the world of the Godfather crowd makes sense to them. I'm not making a parallel between the dramatically horrific culture of living in a concentration camp during World War II, nor am I implying that we should dismiss behaviors that are unacceptable in our nation of laws. Not at all. But I am opening my mind and my eyes to what I think might be an important concept I learned from talking with Frank. A society determines how to conduct itself, to allow those in it to maneuver yet honor the common good for all its citizens, using the term citizen loosely, not as a status. So once smaller subcultures in that society begin to devalue the social contract of the society by undermining the very structure of the contract, this becomes a threat to the society itself, but not until that occurs. So the substructures that include maladaptive behaviors, even criminal behaviors, can be tolerated, and the social contract holds. What Frank expressed was an admission that his smaller subculture works counter to, but not against, the dominant social contract. He knows he will probably be punished for what he did, and even though he did it willingly, and even though it is agreed upon method in his world, and the Godfather clan tries to work the political system to maintain their hold on their money and lifestyle within the dominant structure, knowing they are operating outside the mainstream social structure and are not attempting to topple it. But what if the January 6, 2021 group and those who are part of that subsystem of our nation? This is different. They are most certainly working against the social contract of our society and are not acknowledging otherwise. They admit a desire to topple it and feel entitled to do so. What about this? Clearly, we are in a time of destabilization. However, there might be good news. We humans, I always have to have good news. We humans tend to look at the world through the lens we know, whatever that lens is, and make assumptions, judgments, and conclusions. What Frank reminded me of was this. We tend to judge situations, consequences, and actions of others as though we know their stories, their histories, their reasons. but we don't. This is not to say we should not have a societal standard we hold dear. We must keep standards high if we are to hold the social contract steady and healthy. However, as a pluralistic society that values inclusivity and a more fluid approach to appreciating diversity and varied experience and what we can learn from others and what we can share, it helps to understand how someone got where they are. Thus, smaller subsystems like Frank's and even criminal enterprises like organized crime are not major threats to the social contract or society in general. However, when the threat is aimed at the social contract itself, we take note. I'm reminded how Sarah Palin disparaged the presidential candidate Barack Obama as a community organizer as compared to her past tenure as a mayor by stating, "I guess the small town mayor is sort of like a community organizer, except that you have actual responsibilities." Not only did she devalue his work ethic, but she misunderstood the need for someone who shares commonality with a culture to go back into that culture and empower the people from a place of understanding, shared values, and shared experiences. Palin exemplified the hegemonic privilege of dismissing the importance of stepping back and not imposing one's own experiences and cultural values onto another. However, she also signposted the tactic that would be used to threaten our democracy. And many of us paid attention. That of the imperialistic white supremacist view that one culture should dominate, and this view has been brewing for decades, ever since the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. So we, who pay attention, have been paying attention. But a lot of Americans had not been paying attention. Well, now they are. For decades now, we have been paying attention to normal reactions at abnormal behaviors. Outrage at white police officers killing black people for unjustified reasons. Men not being held accountable for inappropriate sexual behaviors toward women, and now even other men. Unfair sentencing for minor crimes against people of color. Reprehensible demonizing of LGBTQ folks. Corporate malfeasance, legislative nonfeasance, governmental incompetence, institutional corruption, and most recently, blatant criminality at the highest levels at our executive branch that led to what might be real treason and a real threat to our democracy being played out on television. But we do really have good news. It's being played out on television, and the poisons are hatching out. The normalizing of the abnormal is now all out there for the world to see. It's not hidden. It's not obfuscated. It's not deflected. The entire world is seeing what we did. And that is a very good thing, because now something will happen. The fish rots from the head, as we all learned from the Godfather. So either we get fresh fish, or the whole world knows we are rotten. And even that is good news, because light is the best sanitizer. It is the secrets that make us sick. So perhaps we can all benefit from Frank's view. Here's what he said. This is paraphrasing, but it's pretty much what he said. "I know I will probably do more time. I know that the outside world, his words not mine, does not understand what we do or why. And I am okay doing the time because this is my family, my culture, and how we do things. So I will take my lumps and do what must be done. My sisters do not understand. My wife does not understand. And I worry about my daughters, but this is how it is." So I say, well, we find ourselves saying every day, this is how it is. And maybe it's about.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was a wonderful sermon. Thank you so much. I hope you come back to our pulpit soon. And now, as Vanessa extinguishes the chalice, can you read the closing words along with me? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
As we go off to begin our new week and consider our place in this world, let us reflect on what is right action and right conduct for ourselves to each other, and what questions life is asking of us. May it be so.